In the 1960s and 70s, the British street after tea belongs to the children. The front door opens, and it does not close again until the streetlights come on. Kids ride choppers and grifters with no helmets down the middle of the close. They play Kirby against the opposite pavement, 40-40 across a dozen front gardens, and football with jumpers for goalposts until it is too dark to see the ball. A mother leans out the door and calls one name, and the whole street hears it. There are no mobile phones, so the rule is simple. Be home when the lights come on, and you are home. Children walk to school in groups, cut through the same ginnel every morning, and know every dog and every shortcut between their house and the school gate. The estate is not supervised, it is shared. The kids roam from one end of the road to the other, and nobody thinks twice. It was a childhood lived almost entirely outdoors. A summer holiday was 6 weeks of leaving the house after breakfast with a jam sandwich in your pocket and coming back when you were hungry. The games changed with the seasons, and no adult organized any of them. In autumn, it was conkers, soaked in vinegar and baked hard in the oven, swung on a shoelace until one of them shattered. In November, it was building a guy for bonfire night and dragging it round the street in an old pram, a penny for the guy. In summer, it was the swimming baths, or a bike ride to a river or a field that was miles from home and known to no parent. There were dens in the hedgerows and camps on the wasteground. There were whole afternoons spent doing nothing in particular in places no grown-up could see. The risks were real. The freedom was total. And almost every adult who grew up in Britain remembers it as the best part of being young. The walk to school tells the story most clearly. In 1971, 80% of 7- and 8-year-old children in England were allowed to walk to school without an adult. By 1990, that figure had collapsed to 9%. That single statistic from the landmark study called One False Move is the whole story in 2 numbers. The walk to school, once the most ordinary thing in a British childhood, had become so rare that schools now run special weeks just to bring it back. The child who once walked half a mile with a gang of mates now sits in the back of a people carrier in a queue of identical cars outside the gates. The ginnel is gated. The wreck, where you waited for your mates, has a sign on it now. And here is the bitter part the study found. Over those same years, traffic on the roads nearly doubled. Yet the number of children killed on those roads nearly halved. Not because the roads got safer, because the children had been taken off them. The country had not ignored the danger of the roads. Far from it. In 1971, the government launched the Green Cross Code, the most extensive road safety campaign the country had ever seen. A generation learned to stop, look, listen, and think. Taught by the Green Cross man, played on television by David Prowse, the same towering actor who would later wear the costume of Darth Vader. Younger children joined the Tufty Club, named after a small red squirrel, and at its peak, in the early 1970s, that club had around 2 million members across the country. At the school gate stood the lollipop lady in her white coat and her round sign, stopping the traffic by hand so the children could cross. The whole apparatus existed to let children move through the world safely on their own 2 feet. It was never meant to take them off the streets, but step by step, that is what happened. The shift was not a law, it was a feeling, and the state helped to teach it. Through the 1970s, a ginger cartoon cat called Charlie warned a whole generation of children in films made by the Central Office of Information from 1973 never to go off with a stranger. In 1981, the Home Office film called Say No to Strangers went into schools across the country. Then, on the 12th of February 1993, a 2-year-old boy named James Bulger was led by the hand out of a shopping centre in Bootle by 2 10-year-old boys and murdered. The grainy security camera image of that small boy being walked away seared itself into the national memory. The lesson the country drew was that the world beyond the front door had become too dangerous to let a child into alone, even though abduction by a stranger remained, then as now, vanishingly rare. The cameras went up everywhere. In 1993, Britain had only a handful of public security cameras. Within little more than a decade, it had millions. It is worth being honest about the fear, because the fear felt real to the parents who lived it. The newspapers ran the worst stories on the front page, week after week, and the worst story always feels like the most common one. A parent reads about one terrible thing happening to one child 500 miles away, and the lesson lands close to home. Keep them in, keep them where you can see them. No one decided this as a policy. Millions of parents decided it one at a time around kitchen tables, each one quietly drawing the boundary a little tighter than their own parents had drawn it for them. A child allowed to the end of the road became a child allowed only to the front gate, became a child driven the half mile to a friend's house and collected again 2 hours later. Each step felt sensible on its own. Together, they ended something. Fear pulled the children in, and something was waiting to fill the time. Through the 80s and 90s, the television went from 3 channels to many, then to constant. The home computer arrived, then the games console, then the internet, then the screen in every pocket. A child who once had nothing to do but go outside now had 100 reasons to stay in. The estate green where you once built dens became a car park. The bomb site and the wasteground, a whole generation's adventure playground, were fenced off and built on. Front gardens were paved over for cars. The pull of the warm front room, lit by a screen, beat the pull of a cold and empty street. And once the street was empty, there was no reason for any one child to be the only one out on it. The emptiness fed itself. With no other children out there, no parent would send theirs out alone, which meant there were no other children out there. There was something else holding the old world together, and it had quietly gone too. In the street of the 1960s, somebody was usually home. Often it was a mother who did not work outside the house, and from her kitchen window she could see half the street. The shopkeeper knew the children by name. The neighbours watched each other's gardens and each other's kids without ever being asked. It was not a perfect world, and plenty of people were glad to leave parts of it behind. But it meant a child outside was never truly alone. There were 100 eyes on the street, and every one of them belonged to someone who would step in. As more families needed 2 wages, and as neighbours came and went more quickly, those eyes closed one by one. The street that had watched over its children no longer had anyone watching. Playing out taught things that no classroom did. How to come off a bike and get back on, how to settle a row with no adult to run to, how to be bored on a wet afternoon and invent your way out of it, how to judge for yourself whether a situation felt right or wrong and to trust that judgment. How to come in filthy, scabbed, starving and completely happy. These were not extras. They were the whole point. A child who is never allowed to take a small risk never learns to handle a large one. A child who is always supervised never learns what to do when no one is watching. The grandparents watching today see grandchildren who are safer in every way you can measure, and somehow smaller in their world. Ferried from one supervised club to the next, rarely trusted with an afternoon of their own, rarely more than a phone call from an adult. Britain did not decide to end the outdoor childhood in a single moment. There was no vote, no law, no day it was abolished. It was worried away, and built away, and screened away. One fear, and one paved garden, and one fenced field, and one extra hour in front of a screen at a time. Each step taken by good people doing what seemed sensible for the child in front of them. The result is a generation of children who will never know the particular freedom their grandparents took for granted, the freedom of a long summer evening with nowhere to be and no one watching. The streetlights still come on at dusk over the terraces and the estates, the same as they always did. There is just nobody out there now to call inside. There are more stories like this one, about the streets, the weekends, and the country that quietly slipped away. Subscribe to Lost Britain and keep watching the Britain that so many people still remember.